I didn't know my life was about to split cleanly in two until the evening I came home early and realized my husband was planning to erase me, on purpose, for 7 straight days. Not because we were fighting, not because our marriage was falling apart, but because his coworkers convinced him it would be empowering to see how desperate I'd become without his attention. It was a Tuesday, ordinary, quiet, the kind of evening that never warns you it's about to change everything. I came in through the garage around 6, grocery bags cutting into my palms, already rehearsing what I'd tell him about my day. That was when I heard his voice drifting from the dining room, casual, confident, on speakerphone. I stopped in the hallway, just out of sight. 3 female voices layered over each other, laughter, certainty, advice given like commandments. "You're way too available," one of them said. "Men don't value what comes easy," another added. "Go silent for a full week," a third instructed. "No texts, no calls, barely acknowledge her at home." My breath caught in my throat. They weren't talking about a woman, they were talking about me. I stood there, invisible, listening as my husband hesitated, then slowly agreed. Listening as he justified it. Listening as he let them frame our marriage like a psychology experiment, something to test for their entertainment. A week of silence, they promised, would make me anxious, make me chase, make me prove my devotion. What they didn't know, what he didn't know, was that I don't beg for attention, I don't compete for affection, and I don't stay in relationships where love is replaced by control disguised as empowerment. I wanted to storm into that room, confront him, demand answers. Instead, something colder settled into my chest. If he wanted to ghost me to feel powerful, then he was about to learn a truth far more permanent. I don't fight for people who turn intimacy into a game. By the time his 7 days were over, he expected to find a woman grateful for crumbs of affection. What he would actually find was an empty closet, separate bank accounts, and proof that silence can end a marriage faster than any argument ever could. This wasn't revenge. It was self-respect. And once you choose that, there's no going back. My name is Linda Karishma, and I'm not the kind of woman who ever thought she'd become the main character in a story like this. For most of my adult life, I believed in simple math. If you show up consistently, love honestly, and communicate like 2 grown adults, a marriage stays safe. Not perfect, but safe. Predictable in the best way. The kind of stability people secretly crave while pretending they want fireworks. I'm 32. I work in project coordination for a mid-sized construction firm. Deadlines, budgets, schedules, problem solving. My brain is trained to look ahead, to anticipate what could go wrong before it does. It's the reason my bosses trust me with the complicated jobs. It's also the reason I used to think I could always sense a crack in my own life before it became a collapse. Apparently, I was wrong. I met David Morrison at a friend's dinner party 6 years ago. He wasn't the loud one, or the one trying to impress anyone. He had this calm, steady way of being present, like he didn't need attention to feel confident. When I spoke, he listened. Not the polite kind of listening people do while waiting for their turn to talk, but real listening, eyes on me, focused, curious. That alone felt like something rare. We started dating slowly. Weekend coffee turned into weekday dinners. Dinners turned into long drives with the windows cracked and music low. David was consistent. Texts when he said he'd text, showing up when he promised he'd show up. He remembered details. My favorite tea. The way I liked my pillows stacked. The fact that I hated public surprises because they made me feel watched. When he proposed, it wasn't flashy, no crowd, no cameras, just the 2 of us at home after a quiet dinner. He took out the ring. His hands were actually shaking, and he said, "I don't want a life that isn't built with you." I said yes so fast I scared myself. The first few years of marriage were good, not movie good, real good. We had routines, Sunday groceries, Wednesday laundry, Friday takeout. We argued sometimes about stupid things like whether the dishwasher needed to be loaded correctly, or whether his mother needed to comment on everything in our home like she was reviewing a hotel room. But the arguments ended with resolution, not silence. And that's the part that matters. Because David and I, until recently, were the kind of couple who actually talked. If I felt lonely, I said it. If he felt stressed, he admitted it. We didn't do the dramatic punishments other couples joked about. No, I'm fine when we weren't. No slamming doors. No withholding affection to make a point. So when his coworkers started showing up in our lives more, I didn't think much of it at first. It began subtly. A new group chat notification lighting up his phone during dinner. Laughter at something he wouldn't explain because it's just work stuff. A casual comment like, Michelle says men need to keep their wives on their toes, otherwise women get too comfortable. I remember the first time I heard that, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it sounded ridiculous. Who's Michelle? I asked, stirring sauce on the stove, trying to keep my voice neutral. David shrugged. She sits near me, kind of intense, always talking about relationship dynamics. Relationship dynamics? I repeated, tasting the sauce. Yeah, he said, like it was harmless. She thinks couples should, keep the power balanced. Power. That word didn't belong in my marriage. But over the next few months, I noticed something shifting. David didn't change completely. He didn't become cruel or distant all at once. It was smaller than that, which made it harder to name. He started interpreting normal comfort as a problem. Like stability meant I was winning something. He began saying things like, we're a little too predictable, or maybe we've lost some spark. And every time it sounded less like his voice and more like something he'd memorized from someone else. Sometimes he'd come home with this wired energy, restless, almost eager, like he'd been fed a new idea and wanted to test it. I tried to compensate the way women are trained to. I planned date nights. I initiated conversations. I asked him directly if something was wrong. He always smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Nothing's wrong, babe. We're good." And I believed him. Because I loved him. Because he was my husband. Because the version of him I married wasn't the kind of man who would play games with someone's heart. But that Tuesday night, the night I heard him on speakerphone with Michelle, Karen, and Beth, I realized something with a clarity that made my stomach drop. David didn't have to hate me to hurt me. He just had to want their approval more than he wanted our honesty. And the worst part? I could hear, in the hesitation of his voice, that a part of him already knew it was wrong. He just chose it anyway. Looking back now, the warning signs were there long before that Tuesday night. I just didn't recognize them as warnings at the time. After David started spending more time with his coworkers, Michelle, Karen, and Beth, our conversations changed in small but unsettling ways. Not arguments, not accusations, just a shift in tone, like we were no longer speaking from the same emotional language. He began using phrases that didn't sound like him. "You're very secure," he said once, leaning against the kitchen counter, his voice oddly thoughtful. "At least I think so," I replied, confused. "Yeah," he nodded. "Some people say too much security can make relationship stagnant." Some people. Another time, when I asked why he seemed distracted during dinner, he laughed lightly and said, "Relax, Linda. Not everything is about emotional processing." That one stung more than I expected. David used to be the man who encouraged emotional processing, who once told me, "If something's bothering you, I'd rather hear it than guess." Now he was acting like emotional openness was a liability. It was around that time his phone became a permanent extension of his hand. Group chats lighting up late at night. Muted notifications that still drew his eyes downward. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of names I recognized, Michelle, Karen, Beth, and sometimes I wouldn't. When I asked what was so funny, he'd say, "Just work stuff," in a tone that subtly told me not to push. I didn't accuse him. I didn't snoop. I trusted him. But trust doesn't stop intuition from whispering. The real shift came when his coworkers stopped being invisible. They started showing up. First, it was casual. After-work drinks that ran late. Then weekend brunches where I was technically invited but never really included. The first time I met them, I smiled and introduced myself politely. They looked at me like they were evaluating a product. Michelle tilted her head slightly when I spoke, eyes scanning me in a way that felt less curious and more strategic. Karen laughed loudly at her own jokes, frequently interrupting. Beth said very little, but watched everything, especially David. "You're very calm," Michelle said to me at one point, sipping her drink. "I try to be," I replied. She smiled thinly. "Careful. Calm women often don't realize when they're being taken for granted." I remember blinking, unsure how to respond. David didn't defend me. He laughed it off like it was playful banter. On the drive home, I finally said, "Your coworkers have strong opinions." "They're just honest," he replied. "You could learn something from them." That sentence lodged itself somewhere deep in my chest. Learn something. About what? How to make my marriage feel like a battlefield? Over the following weeks, David started doing things that felt designed rather than organic. He'd pull away slightly when I leaned in. He'd delay responding to my texts even when I knew he was free. Not dramatically, just enough to make me notice. I asked him about it once, directly. "Are you okay?" I said. "You feel distant." He hesitated, then shrugged. "I think we've just gotten comfortable. Too comfortable. Relationships need tension sometimes." Tension. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the one I married. "Do you want tension?" I asked quietly. "I want growth," he replied, like it was the same thing. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing. My mind replayed every small moment I'd brushed off, every comment that sounded borrowed, every time he'd compared our steady life to someone else's chaotic drama and implied we were missing something. What I didn't know then, but understand painfully now, was that David wasn't just questioning our relationship. He was being coached, conditioned, encouraged to see my emotional availability not as love, but as leverage. And while I was trying to protect our marriage through communication and patience, he was quietly preparing to test me. The irony is brutal in hindsight. He thought the experiment would reveal whether I valued him enough to chase. What it actually revealed was how much I valued myself. And once that seed of conflict was planted, once manipulation entered the room where trust used to live, everything else became inevitable. I just didn't know yet how fast it would all unravel. The night everything cracked open didn't arrive with yelling or slammed doors. It arrived quietly, deceptively calm. I came home early that Tuesday because a meeting had been canceled last minute. I remember feeling almost pleased about it, thinking I'd surprise David, maybe suggest ordering takeout, maybe sit on the couch together like we used to. The garage door rolled up, the engine cut off, and for a brief moment everything felt normal, until I heard his voice. Not raised, not angry. Confident. Casual. On speaker. I stopped just inside the hallway, grocery bag still in my hands, when I realized he wasn't talking to me. 3 other voices overlapped his. Female voices. Familiar now. Michelle's sharp certainty. Karen's enthusiastic agreement. Beth's quieter, clinical tone. And then I heard my name. Not spoken, but implied. "You're too available," Michelle said, her voice carrying like she was delivering a keynote speech. "Men don't respect that. They need space to feel desire." Karen laughed. "Exactly. When I ignored my boyfriend for 3 days, everything changed. He started chasing again." My pulse began to pound. David didn't interrupt. Beth jumped in smoothly. "It's not manipulation, it's strategy. You're setting boundaries." Boundaries. I pressed myself against the wall, heart racing, body frozen. The groceries slid from my fingers onto the floor, one by one, but I barely registered the sound. Michelle continued, more deliberate now. "Here's what you do. Go completely silent for 7 days. No texts, no calls, barely speak at home. Let her feel the absence. 7 days." My stomach dropped. David finally spoke, and his voice, his hesitation, hurt more than anything else. "A whole week?" he asked. "That feels extreme." Karen jumped in quickly. "Trust us. My cousin did this with her fiancé. By day 5, he booked a romantic trip, upgraded her ring." I felt something sharp lodge in my chest. They were talking about me like I wasn't a person, like I was a reaction to provoke, a response to measure. Beth laughed softly. "Document how she reacts. It'll be interesting." I covered my mouth to stop myself from making a sound. David sighed. "I don't know. Linda and I usually communicate pretty well." There it was. The hope. The tiny thread I clung to. But Michelle crushed it without hesitation. "That's exactly the problem. You've made it too easy. Comfort kills attraction." Silence. Then David spoke again. Quiet. Thoughtful. "I guess maybe she has been taking me for granted lately." The words landed like a physical blow. I felt my knees weaken. Taking him for granted? I replayed every late-night conversation, every meal cooked, every moment I'd asked him how he was really doing. Every time I'd chosen honesty over pride, stability over drama. And now, because I wasn't volatile, because I wasn't withholding, my love was being reframed as complacency. The plan solidified quickly after that. Start this weekend, ignore me completely. Act busy. Say work is stressful. Stay vague. A test. They actually called it that. "If she doesn't react," Michelle laughed, "then you'll know she doesn't value you." David didn't laugh. But he didn't shut it down either. He exhaled slowly. "Okay," he said. "I'll try it." Something inside me went cold. Not angry. Clear. I didn't burst into the room. I didn't confront him. I didn't give them the satisfaction of watching me unravel in real time. Instead, I stepped backward. Slowly, silently. and left the house the same way I'd come in. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. 7 days. That's how long he planned to erase me to see if I'd chase him. What he didn't know was that I don't chase people who intentionally abandon me. I drove to a nearby park and sat by the lake, watching the water ripple in the fading light. My heart hurt, but my mind was already shifting into something sharper. I had 7 days too. 7 days to protect myself. 7 days to prepare for the moment he expected tears, pleading, relief. Instead, he'd get consequences. This wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries. Real ones. By the time I drove home an hour later, the call had ended. David was in the kitchen making dinner, humming lightly, confidence settling into his posture like armor. "Hey," he said cheerfully, kissing my cheek. "You're home early." That kiss, warm, familiar, felt suddenly hollow. I smiled anyway, because he didn't need to know yet. He thought he was about to teach me a lesson. What he didn't realize was that the moment he agreed to that plan, he'd already set something irreversible in motion. And once trust breaks this quietly, it doesn't shatter loudly. It disappears. The first night after I heard everything, I barely slept. David lay beside me, breathing evenly, his body relaxed in a way that felt cruel now that I understood what was coming. I stared at the ceiling, counting his breaths, replaying every word I'd overheard like my mind was punishing itself. "You're too available. Go silent for 7 days. See how she reacts." I didn't cry. Not then. What I felt was heavier than sadness. Something like grief mixed with clarity. The kind that doesn't scream, doesn't beg, doesn't collapse. It just settles. Firm. Final. By morning, my decision was already made. Friday marked the beginning of his experiment. For me, it marked the beginning of something else entirely. When David came home that evening, I saw the shift immediately. He moved differently, more deliberate, more guarded. He didn't look at me when he walked in. His phone stayed in his hand. "Hey," I said calmly, forcing my voice to stay neutral. "How was work?" He glanced up briefly, eyes cool. "Busy. Deadlines." Then he looked back at his phone. That was it. No follow-up, no warmth. I felt the absence like a pressure change in my chest. "So, dinner?" I asked, testing reality, testing whether he'd break character. "Whatever you want," he said, shrugging. "I'm not that hungry." He walked past me and closed the office door. The silence wasn't accidental. It was rehearsed. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, my heartbeat loud in my ears. Then I did something that surprised even me. I didn't chase him. I made dinner quietly, ate alone, cleaned up, and went to bed. That night, lying in the dark, I didn't wonder what I'd done wrong. I wondered how I'd missed the moment my husband decided control was more important than communication. Saturday morning confirmed everything. David wore earbuds around the house, took calls in closed rooms, typed constantly. He barely acknowledged me unless absolutely necessary. "I'm heading out for a few hours," he said, not looking at me. "Okay," I replied simply. He hesitated for half a second, maybe expecting more. I gave him nothing. As soon as the door closed, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. This wasn't impulsive. It was methodical. First, finances. I opened a new account at a different bank that afternoon, transferred exactly half of our joint savings. No more, no less. Screenshot everything. Saved statements. Documented timestamps. Second, legal clarity. I scheduled a consultation with an attorney during my lunch break the following Monday. Not to threaten, not to scare, to understand my options, to protect myself. The attorney listened carefully, his expression serious but not surprised. "You didn't overreact," he said calmly. "You responded to emotional manipulation with boundaries." Hearing that steadied me. Third, housing. By Saturday evening, I had toured a furnished one-bedroom across town. Month-to-month lease. Immediate availability. I signed it without drama, without hesitation. Fourth, packing. I didn't pack everything at once. I was systematic, quiet. Off-season clothes, personal documents, sentimental items he wouldn't notice right away. My grandmother's necklace, photo albums, work files. I moved them to a storage unit late at night, after David went to sleep, humming softly as if nothing in the world was wrong. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, his silence deepened. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't check in. He didn't even seem curious. And that more than anything, confirmed I was doing the right thing. Because someone who loves you doesn't test how long they can ignore you without consequences. By Wednesday, the house felt different. lighter, emptier. Not because things were missing, because I was already leaving emotionally. I took the day off work. Movers arrived in the morning. I supervised quietly, heart steady, hands calm. I took my half of everything, exactly half. 1 nightstand, 3 dining chairs, my desk, my belongings. I updated my address, separated insurance, closed joint credit. By Thursday night, everything was done. David sat in the bedroom with the door closed, laughing on FaceTime with his coworkers. I could hear Michelle's voice faintly through the wall. "Tomorrow's the big reveal," she said excitedly. I sat alone in the living room and wrote the letter. Not angry, not dramatic, clear. Final. Friday morning, before sunrise, I placed the envelope on the kitchen counter, propped against the coffee maker he used every single morning. I looked around the house we'd shared for 6 years. Then I walked out, locked the door, left the key. And for the first time since I overheard that call, I felt something like peace. He thought silence would make me desperate. Instead, it made me decisive. By the time Friday evening arrived, David believed he had won. He didn't know it yet, but the confidence had already settled into him, the quiet assurance of someone who thought their strategy had worked perfectly. 7 days of silence, 7 days of control, 7 days of me not reacting the way he expected. From his perspective, that meant success. From mine, it meant the end of a chapter. David left work that Friday in an unusually good mood. He texted his coworkers in their group chat, something light and smug. "Tonight's the night." Michelle responded immediately with celebratory emojis. Karen suggested celebratory drinks. Beth asked if he'd recorded my reaction yet. They had plans. Happy hour first, victory drinks. Then he'd go home, finally acknowledge me again, bask in whatever relief or gratitude he imagined I'd feel. Maybe I'd be softer, more eager, more careful not to take him for granted again. At 7 p.m., he pulled into the driveway. My car wasn't there. He noticed, but dismissed it. I'd probably gone out, maybe trying to look busy, maybe attempting to mirror his distance. The idea amused him. He walked inside, calling out casually, "Linda, I'm home." Silence. He frowned slightly and stepped into the kitchen. That's when he saw the envelope. His name written on the front, my handwriting, careful, precise. Something shifted in his chest. This wasn't part of the plan. He opened it, and the illusion shattered. As he read, his face drained of color line by line. The words were calm, factual, devastating. I knew about the plan. I heard the entire conversation. I didn't spend the week chasing him. I spent it protecting myself. By the time he reached the part about the accounts, the attorney, the move, his hands were shaking. He dropped the letter and ran upstairs. My side of the closet empty. Drawers bare. Bathroom, no trace of me. He tore through the house, panic escalating with every missing item. Furniture gone, documents gone, half of everything gone. He pulled out his phone and called me. Straight to voicemail. Texted, not delivered. Check location sharing, unavailable. Social media, deactivated. I hadn't just left. I had disappeared. And for the first time all week, David felt the silence he'd planned for me. Only now it was real. The next few days were chaos for him. He called my best friend first. "Where is she?" he demanded. My friend's voice was calm, but cold. "She told me what you did, David. The test, the silence, all of it." "It wasn't like that. You ignored your wife on purpose to see if she'd beg," my friend interrupted. "She didn't. Good for her." He hung up. Then he called my brother. Same response. Then my attorney, only to be told firmly that all communication would go through legal channels. By Sunday, David's coworkers were no longer congratulating him. They were panicking with him. "This escalated way too fast," Karen said during a late-night call. "She overreacted," Michelle insisted. "Most women would have fought for the relationship." Beth was quiet. "This feels planned," David snapped, because it was. For the first time, the truth landed. While he was playing a game, I was making decisions. Monday morning, he went to work exhausted, distracted, unraveling. And that's when the pressure really began. His coworkers, especially Michelle, tried to reframe it. "She's trying to regain control," Michelle said. "You can't give in." "Yeah," Karen added. "If you chase her now, you lose all leverage." Leverage. That word again. Only now it tasted bitter. David didn't feel powerful. He felt alone. When HR called him in later that week, he knew something was wrong. Apparently, I had already requested a department transfer. quietly, professionally. No drama, no accusations, just distance. HR approved it. Michelle, Karen, and Beth were suddenly no longer in my orbit. That detail rattled him more than he expected. Meanwhile, I was settling into my new apartment. It was simple, clean, quiet. The kind of quiet that heals instead of punishes. I slept better than I had in months. I went to work focused, composed. People noticed the change, my steadiness, my clarity. No one asked questions. I didn't offer explanations. Because this wasn't about appearances. It was about alignment. David, on the other hand, was unraveling. Without the group cheering him on, doubt crept in. He replayed the conversation from that Tuesday night, my hesitation in his memory, my silence, my absence. For the first time, he asked himself the question he should have asked weeks earlier. What if they were wrong? On Thursday, he finally confronted them. This wasn't empowerment, he said sharply during lunch. This was manipulation. Michelle scoffed. You're blaming us now? Karen crossed her arms. She couldn't handle a week of space. That's on her. Beth looked away. David stood up, heart pounding. I treated my wife like a test subject, and she walked away with dignity. That's not weakness. The table went quiet. Michelle rolled her eyes. You're choosing her over us? No, he said. I chose wrong in the first place. He walked out. By Friday, official paperwork arrived. Legal separation. Conditions outlined clearly. End all friendships with those coworkers. 30 days of no contact. Therapy, mediation, if I agreed. David sat on the edge of the bed, letter in hand, realizing something fundamental had changed. I wasn't trying to punish him. I was protecting myself. And the consequences he was now living with weren't cruelty. They were clarity. The power dynamic he thought he'd engineered had flipped completely, not through aggression, but through resolve. Silence didn't make me chase him. It made me choose myself. And that realization, the one he couldn't undo, was the moment David finally understood. You don't test someone who knows their worth, because they won't fail the test. They'll walk away from it. The lowest point doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes in the quiet, when there's no one left to blame, no audience left to perform for, and no illusion strong enough to hide behind. For David, that moment came late one night, alone in the house that suddenly felt far too big. Half the furniture was gone, half the closet empty, half the life he'd taken for granted erased with surgical precision. The silence he'd once considered a tool now pressed against his ears until it felt unbearable. He sat on the edge of the bed, my letter folded and unfolded so many times the creases were soft. He wasn't rereading it to argue anymore. He was rereading it to understand. Meanwhile, my dark moment looked very different. It didn't happen the day I left. It didn't happen when I unpacked my last box. It didn't even happen when I slept alone for the first time in 6 years. It happened 3 nights later. I was standing in my new kitchen, staring at a mug I didn't remember buying, when it hit me all at once. This is real. Not empowering, not dramatic, not symbolic. Real. I slid down the cabinet slowly and sat on the floor, my back against the cool wood, the mug still clutched in my hand. My chest tightened. Not with doubt, but with grief. Because even when you leave for the right reasons, you still mourn what you hoped would never break. I miss the version of David I married. I miss the safety I thought we had. I miss believing that honesty alone could protect a relationship from outside influence. The hardest part wasn't anger. It was accepting that love didn't save us from ego. I cried that night for the first time. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet tears, steady and exhausted, sliding down my face as I let myself feel everything I'd held together so carefully all week. I asked myself questions I'd avoided. Did I miss something? Could I have stopped this? Was I too calm, too secure, too trusting? The answers came slowly but clearly. No. I didn't fail him by trusting him. He failed us by testing me instead of talking to me. And that understanding, that clarity, hurt more than confusion ever could. Back in the house we used to share, David was unraveling in his own way. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly. He replayed moments obsessively, the dinners, the conversations, the times I'd asked him gently if something was wrong. He remembered how patient I'd been, how available, how I'd never once tried to control him. And now, surrounded by the wreckage of a choice he'd been encouraged to make, he finally understood something devastating. I hadn't been complacent. I had been secure. And he'd mistaken peace for weakness. The realization crushed him. He reached for his phone more than once, fingers hovering over my name, knowing it wouldn't work, knowing it shouldn't. He remembered the line in my letter. The difference between your silence and mine is simple. Yours was a test. Mine is a boundary. That sentence haunted him. Because boundaries don't bend for regret. They don't respond to panic. They only respond to change. For me, the dark moment passed not because the pain disappeared, but because something stronger replaced it. Resolve. I stood up from the kitchen floor that night, wiped my face, and made myself a promise. I would not break my own boundary just to soothe someone else's guilt. I would not minimize my pain to make reconciliation easier. And I would not return to a version of my life where respect was conditional. If David ever came back into my life, it would be because he understood the weight of what he'd done, not because he feared losing me. Because fear fades, understanding stays. The next morning I woke up with swollen eyes, but a steady heart. I went to work, did my job, laughed once, surprised myself with it, ordered dinner I actually wanted, slept deeply for the first time since Tuesday. David, on the other hand, woke up in the ruins of a lesson he couldn't undo. The experiment was over. The data was in, and the result was undeniable. The moment he tried to measure my worth by how I'd react to being ignored was the moment he lost the right to my immediate forgiveness. Rock bottom doesn't always look like devastation. Sometimes it looks like sitting in the consequences of your own choices with no one left to convince you they were justified. And for both of us, separately, painfully, that's exactly where we were. The shift didn't happen all at once. It began quietly, without apologies, without promises, without anyone asking me to soften what I'd already decided. 30 days. That was the boundary. No contact, no explanations, no attempts to fix things with words before actions had a chance to exist. During those 30 days, I didn't sit around waiting. I went to therapy, not to learn how to forgive him, but to understand myself better, to unpack why I'd stayed calm when something inside me was breaking, to make sure my strength wasn't just endurance dressed up as grace. I learned something important there. There's a difference between being patient and being permissive. I had been patient. David had mistaken that for permission. Meanwhile, he was doing the work I'd required, not because it was easy, but because for the first time, there was no applause waiting at the end. He cut contact with Michelle, Karen, and Beth completely, blocked numbers, deleted threads, requested a department transfer, and followed through. He started individual therapy on his own, without anyone coaching him on what to say. Not performative change, uncomfortable change. On day 28, my attorney forwarded me documentation. Quietly, neutrally. Screenshots, confirmation emails, proof of therapy enrollment, proof of the transfer. I didn't feel relief. I felt cautious respect, because change that's real doesn't rush to be seen. It waits. On day 31, I agreed to mediation. Not reconciliation. Mediation. We sat in a neutral office, chairs angled away from each other at first. David looked different, thinner, yes. But more than that, stripped of certainty. Not defensive, not performative. Just present. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't start with, "I miss you," or "I didn't mean to." He started with this: "I treated our marriage like a strategy instead of a partnership." That mattered. He didn't blame his coworkers. He didn't say he was pressured. He didn't say he was trying to improve us. He owned the choice. "I wanted to feel powerful," he continued quietly, "and I didn't realize I was trading trust to get it." I listened. I didn't interrupt. Because this wasn't the moment for emotion. It was the moment for truth. When it was my turn, I spoke calmly, but without cushioning the impact. "You didn't hurt me because you went silent," I said. "You hurt me because you planned it, because you discussed me like I wasn't a person in the room, because you chose approval over integrity." He nodded, eyes wet but steady. "I know," he said, "and I know I don't deserve immediate forgiveness, or reassurance, or access to you." That sentence was the turning point. Not because it fixed anything, but because it acknowledged something he'd never understood before. Access is a privilege, not a right. We agreed to couples counseling under strict conditions. Legal separation remained in place. Weekly sessions, no shortcuts, no pressure, no timeline promises. Hope, not guarantees. As I left the building that day, I felt something unexpected. Not relief, not love, agency. For the first time since that Tuesday night, the future wasn't something happening to me. It was something I was choosing, carefully, deliberately, with my eyes open. And whether David earned his way back into my life or not, I knew this much with absolute certainty. I would never again confuse silence with strength, and I would never stay where my worth had to be proven through deprivation. The turning point wasn't his apology. It was my clarity. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They came in waves, quiet at first, then undeniable. David felt them before anyone else did. At work, the atmosphere shifted. The confidence he once carried, fueled by validation from Michelle, Karen, and Beth, was gone. He'd transferred departments, which meant new desks, new routines, new faces, no inside jokes, no lunchtime strategy sessions, no echo chamber reinforcing his worst instincts. For the first time in months, he had no one telling him he was right. And without that noise, the truth got louder. In therapy, he was forced to confront something deeply uncomfortable. His need for external validation had outweighed his commitment to internal integrity. He hadn't just ignored me, he'd outsourced his sense of worth. That realization cost him. Not financially, not professionally, emotionally. Friends noticed the change immediately. The ones who knew the story, who knew what he'd done, didn't side with him. They didn't scold him either. They stepped back. Because once trust fractures in a marriage, people stop pretending it's just between the couple. My absence spoke louder than any explanation ever could. David's family felt it too. His mother called me once, just once. Her voice was careful, measured. "I don't agree with what he did," she said, "and I won't make excuses for him." That mattered. She didn't pressure me to return, didn't frame it as forgiveness being a virtue I owed him. She understood something many people don't. Reconciliation isn't a moral obligation. It's a mutual decision. While David was sitting in the weight of his choices, my life was stabilizing. Not joyful in a dramatic way, grounded. Counseling helped me articulate something I'd always felt but never named. My calm wasn't passive. It was intentional. And I was allowed to protect it fiercely. I didn't gloat. I didn't tell our story publicly. I didn't correct anyone's assumptions. I simply lived. And that, ironically, made the fallout sharper for him, because he couldn't frame me as hysterical, or vindictive, or emotionally unstable. I wasn't any of those things. I was consistent. When we began couples counseling, the imbalance was obvious, not in power, but in accountability. David did most of the work. I set the pace. He apologized, not once, but many times, but not the way people do when they want absolution. He apologized without asking for reassurance. He listened without interrupting. And when sessions ended, he didn't follow me out trying to bridge the distance prematurely. That restraint mattered. The hardest moment for him came unexpectedly. About 5 weeks into counseling, he ran into Karen at a coffee shop downtown. She smiled like nothing had happened. "Long time," she said lightly. "So, did the silent treatment work?" David didn't smile back. "No," he said calmly. "It destroyed my marriage." Karen scoffed. "That's dramatic. She couldn't handle space." "She handled it better than I did," he replied. "She chose herself." Karen rolled her eyes. "Wow, she really trained you, didn't she?" That was the moment David fully understood something that couldn't be unlearned. These women had never wanted him empowered. They wanted him aligned with them. He walked away without another word. That night in therapy, he told me about the encounter, not defensively, not as a performance, but as a confession. "I didn't defend myself," he said quietly. "I defended you." I nodded. Not in approval, in acknowledgement. Over time, the consequences settled into place naturally. The coworkers who had encouraged manipulation lost access, not just to David, but to the influence they'd enjoyed. The marriage, once casual, unexamined, became intentional or risked ending entirely. And the dynamic between us shifted permanently. Not back to what it was, forward into something more honest, or nothing at all. One night, after a long session, David asked me a question he hadn't dared ask before. "Do you think I can ever be someone you feel safe with again?" I didn't answer immediately. Safety isn't a promise. It's a pattern. "I don't know yet," I said truthfully, "but I know I won't lie to myself to make it easier for you." He nodded. That was the price. And the cost was fair. Because fallout isn't punishment. It's reality adjusting to truth. And truth, once revealed, always rearranges everything around it. Healing didn't arrive like a sunrise. It came more like a quiet morning you wake up into and realize, without fanfare, that the air feels lighter. Months passed. Not dramatic ones, not cinematic ones. Just steady time filled with honest conversations, difficult sessions, and long pauses where neither of us rushed to fill the silence. David didn't try to win me back. He didn't perform change. He lived it. consistently, even when no one was watching. And I watched, carefully. One afternoon, after a counseling session, we sat across from each other at a small cafe. No tension, no urgency, just two people acknowledging the truth without trying to soften it. "I still love you," I said finally, "but love isn't what broke. Trust did." He nodded, and trust isn't repaired with words. That was the moment I knew something fundamental had shifted. Not because everything was fixed, but because nothing was being minimized anymore. Eventually, we made a decision. Not to erase the separation, not to pretend it never happened, but to rebuild slowly, deliberately, without shortcuts. We didn't rush back into the life we had before. We redesigned it. Boundaries where assumptions used to live, conversations where silence once ruled, accountability where ego once sat comfortably. And something unexpected happened. I didn't feel smaller for enforcing consequences. I felt stronger for surviving them. The lesson I carry now, the one I wish more people understood, is simple but uncomfortable. Real love doesn't require tests. It requires trust. And trust is built through consistency, respect, and the courage to communicate before manipulation becomes an option. If someone needs to ignore you to feel powerful, they are already losing you. If someone needs outside validation to measure your worth, they are already failing you. And if you ever find yourself standing in the quiet aftermath of someone else's experiment, wondering whether you overreacted, let me be clear. Walking away from manipulation is not weakness. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. And choosing self-respect does not mean you loved less. It means you finally loved yourself enough to stop accepting less than you deserve. Some relationships don't survive that awakening. Some do, but only if both people are willing to grow beyond ego and into accountability. Either way, the outcome is the same. You win back your clarity. And once you have that, you never allow yourself to be tested again.